So there are some periods in life that are full of joy, and we just come to church and life is great and everything's wonderful and butterflies and unicorns. That has not been the last couple months for some reason. So I think we know everybody, but if somebody were to come here for the first time today, they might have the impression of like, boy, everybody here's so sad. What in the world's going on? But that's not the message we've been hearing today. It's in spite of. A few weeks ago, I guess it was November. Let me go back. I think it was 7 years ago, Chris and I had the privilege of being taught by the man that's on the front row here. I'll give you his name in just a minute. Through our foster care licensing process, our second time around, we had to attend classes, and we liked all of our teachers. I'm not saying this because he's sitting here. I've said it many, many times. But there's a difference between somebody who is teaching because they're slotted for that time and they need to get the information so you can get credit for your hours. Maybe some of you have been in those trainings, like, let's get this over with. And then there are people that when you hear them talk, you can tell that they believe what they're saying and they have an intimate connection with what's going on in life. So as we sat through, no pressure, but as we sat through Darren's classes, we realized here's a man who not only has head knowledge, but is intimately connected with the information he's giving. So we went through that. A few years ago, maybe 4 or 5, Darren came and spoke to us as a church about foster care. He's still helping. It seems like more of a calling when you hear him speak, that he works for the for DCS and teaches people how to help. So in November, before even more of this stuff happened, I reached out to him and said, hey, do you remember that lecture you gave on the stages of grief and fear and how everything gets all muddled up and confused, and help us think through? Do you think you could bring that to us? Because for some reason it's just hit us recently, and it's gotten even worse in the past few weeks. So Darren Wilkinson has become a trusted source of guidance for Carissa and I as we've worked through life, and it's my privilege to allow him to come and impart some of that to you today. So he doesn't see himself as a great source of wisdom in all things knowledge, but I have confidence today that as we ask God to help us hear what he has to say, Darren can maybe give us a little bit of insight and help unmuddy some of the waters. So he has as long as he wants to talk, and he can talk about anything he wants to talk about. But I'm looking forward to his wisdom today. Darren?
So it says in your program that I'm going to do a sermon. I just got a sermon from you through music. So thank you for feeding me. As I listened to the songs, I started to recall a story. About 10 years ago, I was listening on the radio Christmas time to the Christmas music, and one that's always playing at Christmas time is I'll Be Home for Christmas, the Bing Crosby song. We're familiar with it. I'd heard it my whole life, but about 10 years ago was the first time I paid attention to the actual words where it said, if only in my dreams. And I thought, who would write a song that's only in your dreams? Why don't you just go home? So I did some research on it. Am I missing something about this song? Yeah, the song was written for the soldiers over in the European theater. In 1943, Ben Crosby released that song in October of 43. Historically, our troops were bogged down. War was stagnant, not going anywhere. It wasn't looking promising. Remember, we'd done this in World War I, and it was awful. Crosby offered to do a song. Some of the generals said, don't let him, because they'll get homesick and want to come back and walk away. Luckily, Eisenhower said, do it, sing it. We now know, looking back on it, it was the turning point for the Allied troops. A song changed their will to fight, turned them into ferocious warriors, and the outcome changed. 20, 30 years later, the veterans were still talking about that song and how it changed their whole approach in the European theater. Music. Not very many people know that. When you listen to I'll Be Home for Christmas, think about that. It's why we're not speaking German today. Music's powerful, and I just felt that with your music today. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about grieving. And we've gotten some good messages today on what's happening here in grieving. It's a bumpy road, grieving. It's not something we sign up for, but it is part of the human experience. When I teach grieving to foster parents or to workers or to contract providers, the message is the same, whether it's we're looking at kids or we're looking at ourselves or for others around us. In the human experience of grieving, there's two types. There's the forced change kind of grieving. We'll call that a psychological type of grieving. That's where something happened in your life where you're forced to make some changes that you don't like. And it causes grieving. Grieving manifests itself as frustration, as anger, sometimes as depression. Sometimes it's just you lose the will to continue. Okay, so there's the psychological kind, and that usually has what our experts say are 5 stages. Now, you don't have to ping all 5 stages, but you need to be wise enough to recognize when you see one of the stages, uh-oh, that's me or someone around me struggling with some grief. But it's the psychological kind. Now, don't get confused and think that, well, the psychological kind isn't as deep as the second kind is the soul-piercing, the emotional kind. You lose something that's really critical to you. You don't want to move on because it's gone. That's a deeper kind. Let's talk about the psychological first and the 5 stages. It's just as important. And might I just point out, too, that for you to fall into the grieving process, it can be over a can of Coke. Doesn't have to be over the fact that you lost your job. And I say, kind of in humor, can of Coke, but if you understand Coca-Cola and what happened. In April of 1985, I know I'm dating myself, but some of you might remember that, Coca-Cola announced to the free world that they're changing the formula of Coke. Now, that doesn't make much sense to us today when you think about the number 1 soft drink maker in the world is going to alter their formula. What was happening in the 1970s, Pepsi started doing these blind taste challenges in shopping malls across America, and they were recording it. And you could go to a shopping mall and take this taste challenge, and you'd get a choice. You get 3 cups, and you have to taste them all. One's Coke, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper. And then you have to say which one you like the best without knowing in advance which was which. Over 80% of the time, Pepsi was winning in the blind taste challenges. Coke initially thought they're cheating. Something's rigged here. They did it themselves, and they're like, oh, my goodness. Our formula isn't the one everyone's liking. So they put their best scientists to work and thought, we got to come up with a better taste. They spent millions of dollars in several years, and they came up with a winning formula, one that was beating Pepsi 90% of the time. And their blind taste, they did over 100,000 tests with it on this new formula, and it was nailing it. So they were so confident, they announced in April of 1985, we've got new Coke. We're doing away with the classic stuff. And you're going to love it, by the way. And, we don't like forced change. And over a can of Coke, we sat back with our mouths open watching the world get mad. They took to the streets and protested with signs that said, our kids will never know true refreshment. You laugh today, but you're talking about New York and Boston, thousands of people going down the street mad over a can of Coke. They were being forced to make a change they didn't want. The Coke delivery trucks were getting robbed of the classic formula at gunpoint. The stores were being broken into at night to get the last of the original formula. Psychiatrists were writing the corporation saying, hey, can you make the original formula prescription-based? Because some of our clients said they're going to kill themselves with a can of Coke. Well, in July of 85, so just a few months later, Coca-Cola fired some of their top executives and came out with an announcement, we're just kidding, we're not going to do this. We're going to sell new Coke, but we're also going to have classic Coke. And on the shelves for the next 7 or 10 years, you could have a choice between classic Coke and new Coke. New Coke's gone. Even though everybody said, on a scientific level, new Coke's far better. No, it ain't. I'm not changing. We stuck with classic, and it's still around today. It's probably one of the best lessons you can look on grieving and how we as a nation, you saw it, the psychological grief and how, by gosh, you can watch the stages. And Coke backed off. And we're still drinking Coke today in their classic formula. By the way, on a side note, if you, for kicks and giggles, if you would have robbed the new Coke truck, those cans are worth $50 each now. You could have retired with a truckload of new Coke now, unopened. It matters to the collectors whether it's been opened or not. Okay, so what are these 5 stages? Well, the first one is shock and denial. On the psychological side, whether it's a can of Coke or your job, what are you mad at? Well, first you get in shock, you're numb. Oh my goodness, what does this mean? Shock can last a couple of days or a couple of weeks. You're really compliant. You're just like almost a zombie trying to figure out what's this going to impact. Denial, that's you thinking, you know what, I didn't have a job before this one, I'll find another one. Except what you're not realizing is they're automating your career and some robot's doing it now, and you're going to realize in 6 months there isn't something else out there for you. And now denial wears off, and what's the next stage? Anger and frustration. That can come within a day or 6 months, the next stage, anger and frustration. Over what? Over the fact that this really did happen and it walloped you, right? Oh, and by the way, you don't have to experience all 5 stages. Sometimes you can jump right in on stage 2. Why is that? Because you realize as soon as they announced it, that they're taking your job away, that you're mad. Well, you're right in it. Can you recognize it in yourself? That's the big takeaway. As we go through these 5 stages, can you spot it when you're doing it? And even better, can you start paying attention to those around you when they're struggling with it? Right? Because they may need some help getting out of that rut. So then we got this anger and rage stuff, and the stage 3, our experts say, is the bargaining stage. That's where we try to go to anybody we think has power to fix this thing and see if we can get some control, which, by the way, is the healing ointment for the psychological grief, is us feeling like we got some control again in our life. And one of the ways we try to do that is we bargain with anyone we think has power to get something. Did you see it in the Coke folks? They were bargaining. Can we get it as prescription-based? Can we do something with... How can we keep just a little bit of it, right? They're grieving. And by the way, if they can win on some of this bargaining stuff, that's the control they're looking for. So if you're seeing it with your kids and you see a kid trying to bargain or you trying to bargain, well, what are some areas of your life you can get more control over? It's the soothing ointment you'll need to get past this speed bump you're facing. If you don't get that bargain chip, it'll start causing you to feel depressed about what you've lost, about what you don't have control over, and that can get you even further down into that rut. And by the way, depression often looks different in men and women. So depression in men often manifests itself as, it's your fault. It's not my fault. It's your fault, or Joe Biden's the one that's blamed for all this stuff, or whoever, right? When in reality, the real problem's inside. We're just depressed. Usually women, when they get depressed, they turn it inward. It's my fault. I'm not doing enough. I'm not good enough. So just pay attention to it. It doesn't always have to be male or female that way, but most of the time it is. So just kind of watch for it. When you see it, recognize, now let's see if we can get some ointment on that. At some point, you got to accept this change. And when you see them getting to that acceptance part, then you know, phew, we're out of it. We're ready to move on. That's the 5th stage. So that's the psychological part of things. And now let's spend a moment talking about that deeper wound. It doesn't come in stages. It comes in what our experts say are 5 flavors. When you get emotionally wounded, And let's use, for instance, death. I've been hearing a lot of it today. When you lose someone significant in your life, it carves a piece of you that, man, it hurts to breathe. Get through this thing. The 5 flavors that we humans like to take when we get that emotional deep wound, first one is the nomad griever, the most dangerous type of grieving. The nomad griever is the person who's decided that life isn't worth living without this in it. I'm done. You can spot them because they're not going out with their buddies. They're not doing their hobbies. They don't even want to eat. They just want to go stay in their room and maybe stare at the wall. The Southerners have an expression for the nomad griever. They call it, well, she just turned her face to the wall. She'll be dead in 6 months. You think I'm kidding? Go look at the tombstones at cemeteries. Take your breath away. How many couples die within 6 months of each other? Because they just don't want to go on without their partner. This is fixable, but we got to spot it. It's relationship-based healing. To get out of that rut, they have to have some significant relationship come into their life and literally breathe them into the land of the living again. Because they're stuck in the land of the dead. Nomad grieving. It's how some people grieve. Second form of deep grieving is the memorialist griever. You can hardly drive 5 miles in any direction without bumping into a memorialist griever. It's probably one of the most popular ways we grieve. We create these memorials on the side of the highway with crosses and flowers and loving memory of. We put stickers on the back window of our cars. We get tattoos in loving memory of. Nothing wrong with that way of grieving. It just says, hey, this person was important, especially to me. And I don't want, especially me, forgetting about him. Okay, it's a fine way to grieve. What I'm paying attention to, and I hope you do too, is how often are the flowers getting updated on the side of the road? Because if it starts out daily and then goes weekly, what you're really looking to is we need to get them back in the land of the living. Right? If they're still going weekly out there updating those flowers, they need some help. And it's been a couple months. Somebody needs to help. And if there isn't that significant relationship in their life, then they're going to need some professional help because we've got therapists who are trained to build that bridge, get them out of that rut. But they'll need it or they'll stay there for years. I'm not saying that this missing of important person is some point going to go away. It may be there for the rest of your life, but what's it going to take to get you back to the land of the living where you can enjoy the relationships that are here now? You know, your siblings, your grandchildren, we need you back here. We need you out of that rut. But this one's relationship-based, so pay attention. Third flavor is the recreator. This is an interesting one. Typically happens to a situation where, let's say, a 2-year-old drowns in a pool accident. Devastating. In 6 months, they're pregnant again with another child. Uh-oh. When I see that on the child welfare side, it's uh-oh. Bad news, this child's not going to replace what they're missing. It's only going to get bumpier. We got to get that healed first. Sometimes folks will latch on to someone else's 2-year-old. And try to recreate that relationship. We see it in adopted kids who, lose a parent that was significant, and now they're getting adopted, and we'll get a call the first week and say, this is looking wonderful. This child is really attaching to me. And then 3 weeks later, they'll call and say, I don't think we can do this. The child doesn't like the way we cook, doesn't like the clothes we wear, doesn't like how the house is decorated. They're trying to change everything. You see it? We got a griever here. We got to get some ointment on this. It's relationship-based. They're trying to recreate a loss, and it's not going to work that way. But we need to be wise enough to spot it. And then strategic enough to find the relationship that will help them heal. And remember, sometimes it's going to have to be a therapist. The fourth type is the activist griever. This person wants to make sure that this loss wasn't in vain, that some good comes from it. They lose a child or a spouse or whatever. Well, you know how Mothers Against Drunk Drivers was created? a mother who lost a child to a drunk driver, she went on a crusade to make sure that good will come from her child's death and to make sure she can reduce this pain for other parents. And she crusaded and created an amazing organization. You can say, that's great. But what we have to be careful of is sometimes we can go crusading as a way to soothe the open wound. And we're forgetting about all the other relationships in our life because we're out crusading. We need to do that in a balanced approach. We're really living in the land of the dead still. We got to balance that. That makes sense? Every year at the State House, we get folks that come up there and they want to pass laws. And they're activist grievers. Their son was killed in an industrial accident where a fluorescent light fell and killed him. And they want to pass SB 397 that says all fluorescent lights get 3 straps. Why? So that good can come from our loss. Or they threaten to sue everybody. Because some good must come. It's grieving. It's a deep wound. You know, the kind that hurts to breathe. The fifth kind, and I suppose the one that's usually brings the ointment the quickest, is the person who our experts say is the seeker. They're turning to a higher power for an answer. They want an answer from God for why this happened, and it usually takes them to a church, and where church is people, and that's what they needed was relationships, and they're usually the ones that get the ointment the quickest. Which is a powerful message to all the other flavors, is that you're wiser if you do this journey with God. And when you go seeking God, you usually find other people because that's kind of the basis of what God's about. We're all in this together. And isn't it interesting, we Christians see it, that God's healing hand is usually us. He works through us. Healing, grieving often comes through us. So we have to be wise enough to be able to spot the types of grieving, whether it's in ourselves or others, and then be strategic enough to make sure that we can help get the ointment applied. Does that make sense? Now, it's easy to talk about it here in church. It's a whole other thing to go out there and try to live it. Because there's all kinds of speed bumps that happen in life, right? In fact, we can get mired in the speed bumps when we think about it. If you try to drive through Bloomington on Wednesday night at 5:30, you're going to hit 17 red lights, and it'll take you over half an hour to get through town, right? That's frustrating. You can get wrapped up in the nonsense of a red light and miss the little moments of heaven that are happening around you. We had some little moments of heaven up here just a minute ago singing to us. Did you feel it? I think you did, because you seem to be really spiritual people. But if we can train ourselves to recognize those little moments of heaven, even when we're stopped at a red light, life's just going to go a lot smoother for us. For me, when I think about my moments of heaven, it might be odd for you to hear this, but I love prime rib. When I'm sitting at Texas Roadhouse looking at that 12-ounce prime rib, you could literally start the stopwatch. Tick, 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 tick. I'm about to have 17 and a half minutes of heaven on earth. With that loaded baked potato, with that Roadhouse roll and honey butter. It doesn't get any better than this. Now, there's 24 hours in a day, but I just had 17 and a half minutes of heaven on earth. We have these in our daily living, these little moments. If we can appreciate them, it flattens out the speed bumps for us. I go for a walk. I've been married 31 years, and for the last 20 years, my wife and I have made a habit of meeting together in the evening and go for a walk, and our walk takes about 45 minutes. Why do we do this? She's a university professor, and she's busy with her day, and I work in child welfare. I'm busy with my day, and if we don't make a plan, we're going to meet and recalibrate our relationship on a daily basis. That 45-minute walk has turned into a heaven on earth moment for each of us each day. Sometimes I'm at red lights in my life and I start daydreaming about tonight I'm going to be on a walk with my wife where we turn the cell phones on silent and we just enjoy each other's company, talking about the day, sharing what's happened to us. It's heaven on earth. For me, that's amazing. Permit me to share one more of my heaven on earth moments. I like classic cars, and I got a 77 Lincoln Continental. It's 22 feet long, right? Weighs as much as a tuna boat. It's built out of bulletproof metal, right? Gets 5 miles a gallon. But when I take that thing on a Sunday drive, the seats are as comfortable as my living room couch. It floats down the highway like I'm on a cloud, right? When the windows are up, it's so quiet in that car, I can turn on music and it's heaven on earth. The next 31 minutes, I'm just enjoying heaven on earth. I can appreciate these, and they've helped me flatten out the speed bumps of life, knowing that, we get heaven on earth moments. Because we're also going to get some of those dark stuff that can really throw us in a rut. If we can cling to our heaven on earth moments, it might just be what we need, along with our relationships with each other, which is amazing to hear you guys already have. Hey, well, that's my message. Thanks for letting me share it, and thanks for giving me a chance to visit with you today.